part A asks us what 1/2 times 1/4 is. So the first thing that I thought of was I asked myself what 1/2 is 1/4 times, which led me to think of the question of what is 1/4 of 1/2. So these are the two things that I thought to myself, which led me to think that I need to split 1/2 into 4 pieces because I have a half and I need to find 1/4 of that half. So in order to do that, I have to split up 1/2 into 4 pieces. And to do that, I had to make them into 8 parts because 8 out of 8 is a whole, and a half of the whole would have to be 4 parts out of the 8, which is why I changed the denominator to 8 instead of fourths. So we can get to our answer by asking ourselves, what is 1/4 of the half? Well, this is a half, and here's the rest of the half. So this is a half, and 1/4 out of this half is 1/8, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. So 1 out of 4 piece is 1/8. Next, I will draw a visual and tell you a story to prove that 1/2 times 1/4 equals 1/8. So here's my visual of 1/2 times 1/4, which equals 1/8. So what I did was I first split it into 8 equal parts, each space being 1/8 out of the 8 out of 8 parts. And then I split it in half, because I need to find 1/2 times 1/4. So then I just disregard all of the blue and I only focus on the orange side. So a fourth of this 1/2, which you can tell that this is 1/2 because it is broken into 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. And one piece out of those 4 spaces is 1/8, and is 1/8 because, once again, the whole is out of 8 spaces. And to understand this even better, I have a story to go along with it. So my sister and I moved into an apartment together, and we each decided that we get half of the space. So we equally divided the apartment into a half, and I realized I wanted to bring my dog to the apartment, and I decided I need to give my dog a fourth of my space, not a fourth of the whole house or the apartment, but just a fourth of my half. So I figured out what 1/4 of 1/2 is, and my dog ended up getting this 1/8 of the entire room, or a fourth of my half. Also, I meant to show that each space in my half represents 1/4. So this is 4 out of 4 pieces of a whole, but my dog gets an eighth out of the 8 out of the 8 spaces, or she gets 1/4 out of the 4 out of 4 spaces. Part B asks what is 1/2 minus 1/4. So the first thing that I thought of to solve this problem was to ask myself, what would 1/2 be if it were missing 1/4 from its whole? And it's really important to note that it's missing 1/4 not from its 1/2, but it's missing 1/4 from its whole. So I broke the whole 2 over 2 into 4 pieces, or 4 over 4, and so I put 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. So what I did then is I split those 4 pieces into a half, because that's what we have here, 1/2, and then I took 1/4 away from the half, so I crossed out one of the 1/4s, which means that we are left with 1/4. So the answer to 1/2 minus 1/4 is 1/4. So the main difference between part A and part B is how we're breaking up the pieces. So in part B, we're breaking up the whole into 4 pieces, where in part A, we're breaking up the half into 4 pieces, and then we're breaking up the whole into 8 pieces. So in part A, we're finding what 1/4 is out of my half, where part B, we are finding what 1/4 is out of my whole. So here's my visual for part B. I separated the whole into 4 spaces rather than 8 spaces as I did in part A. And then I separated it into a half again. And then out of the half, I subtracted 1/4 from the whole. So even though it is split into halves, I still separated the 1/4 from the entire whole. And that means that I am left with, so this is the space that I subtracted 1/4 from. And then I'm left with this 1/4 piece. So the answer comes out of the half, but when I'm subtracting it, it comes out of the whole. So in other words, if you look at the visual, really what I'm doing is I'm taking a half from a half. So this is a half of the whole, and I'm taking half from the half. But if you think about it in regards to the whole, I'm taking 1/4 from the whole, and this 1/4 is coming from my half. So the story that goes along with this is, once again, my sister and I are sharing an apartment, and once again she gets half of the space and I get half of the space. And we already tried out having a dog living with us, and my sister wasn't very happy with it, but I convinced her and she said that we can get a cat. So my sister told me that this time the cat gets to have 1/4 of my space. I don't really know why. I think she likes my cat better than my dog, I guess. But so I then wanted to know how much of my room that I did have, so I only had half of the room, so I wanted to know how much of my half I would have for myself if my cat gets a whole 1/4 of my room, of the half of my room. So I found that if my cat gets 1/4 of my space, then I also only get 1/4 of my space, and then my sister gets still her whole half. Yeah, so actually my cat would be getting 1/4 out of the entire apartment, and I would be getting 1/4 out of the entire apartment, and my sister would still be getting 2/4 or a half of the entire apartment.